So welcome to the AfricaNEV podcast. My name is Gada Shiago, and I'm here with Olukokun Tolulope and our special guest, Percy Korsah. How did you get into the EV or electric vehicle space?
I guess I've come from the world of petroleum. I started as a typical fan of gasless, and all the big noisy cars. And about 5 years ago, I got my first taste of EVs. And what they say is once you try EVs, there's no going back.
And that rhymes like something I know. I've heard a similar saying before.
They've been right all along. And since I started with EVs, I didn't only transition from the oil and gas industry, but I'm now into regulation. So it justifies why I should stay with EVs. So what I do now is more of research into best practices to limit greenhouse gas pollution in the oil and gas industry. As you can see, I'm a family man.
Yeah.
They are demanding their time.
Okay. How does one go from somebody who is into oil and gas into regulation? Can you tell us practically what happened? What happened practically?
So my first taste of transition came with the massive drop in oil and gas prices sometime around 2011, 2012.
Okay.
Originally, my career was interestingly in cancer biology. That was my original background. Cancer biology.
Okay.
I was with Tufts University in Boston, and it was depressing. I used to work on kids, so it's depressing when all you know is you're losing numbers, right? Because we're taking biopsies from little kids. It was a study on Burkitt's lymphoma, and pretty much research in oncology, you won't see your results for 10 to 20 years, right? So all the research we're doing would help people in 10, 20, 30 years. But all you see as a scientist is you go into the lab or the hospital or whatever for your patients, and every week or every other week or every month, you're losing someone, right? So that's depressing. Yeah. So that pushed me totally out of the health sciences. And I got caught up into hydrology in Holland. Then I took a break from study, and I was moving through Europe, and the design of the Netherlands with regards to overcoming, Netherlands is typically under sea level, right? Yeah. So engineering structures in place which prevents the country from drowning, pretty much. And when you see and understand it, it's so impressive. And that was my turnaround. So got into water engineering, and the next best thing to water engineering is petroleum, right? So then I stayed in there. So from processed water to reservoir engineering to prospecting, I worked a bit with spill as well. So I try to bring in my health sciences, right? So as much as the petroleum was attractive as a field, because this is where I was interacting with people from Norway and Sweden and all over Europe. Everybody started with 6 figures in the oil and gas industry. So it was exciting.
It was good money.
Which was great. So it was exciting. And that took me pretty much all over the world. I was in the Middle East, Southeast Asia. I was everywhere there was oil and gas, because I was into consulting. So I was covering areas with enhanced oil recovery where we're working with Petrol, right? So Petrol was the big software used by Schlumberger for reservoir modeling, right? So that's where you make the most money in the oil and gas industry, when you give good data for a reservoir, right? Because that is what will make you know if that prospect is worth it. So I spent quite some time there. I spent a lot of time building spill response models as well. I used to actually do training with Corpus Christi, Texas A&M University. So I was bringing people from Africa, and then we're training them in hazmat, oil spill response, and it was fun. But when the oil prices started tanking, then you realize that people can't afford the training, people can't afford the best practices. And already the blowout 2010, the BP, it was massive enough to make the oil and gas industry look bad. And if you remember, BP had a 5-year history where 5 years before that, there was a blowout. And in 2015 as well, there was another one. So all these
There's like a trend.
attention. Yes. And again, there was a lot of noise about places like North America, especially Alberta in Canada, where shale gas was now the big thing.
Okay.
So my first conference, I actually ran a workshop in Alberta sometime in 2014. And it had to do with produce water treatment because that was one of my areas of specialization. But flying over Alberta and looking at the distraction of the oil and gas industry, it was like, okay, this is it. Right?
Alberta, they do tar sands, right?
Correct. And they actually have the largest surface disturbance on the planet.
Whoa.
And I wish I can pull a photo of it. I'll send it to you later to put in the podcast, where it's massive because it's all surface excavation, right? Wow. Then there was more of scoop out the sands, heat it up, get the bitumen out, and there you go. So it was massive, and it's still the biggest scar on the surface of the earth. It's now that technologies have come in where there's steam injection to be able to extract, so you don't see massive surface distraction. All you see are seismic lines, roads, well pads, right? And then, so all these coming together, I took a big turn, and I actually came into research in better practices, right? So where currently what I do is I go out there to the production areas in the summer, and then I take data on seismic lines and all these disturbances, and then look at how much it's changing the greenhouse flux budget. Okay, so are these practices increasing pollution? Are these practices impacting? A lot of the previous search was to environmental impact. So the big thing here is caribou, right? A lot of research has been done saying, yeah,
the animal.
Good. Because there's no data to show the effect on greenhouse gases, right? So I have lines older than 50 years and the trees are not growing back, if I showed you photos. But previously, all these were thought to grow back. So legislation wasn't in place. So all you had to do was restore to environmental perspective, which is more of wildlife, right? So if the trees and the roads are leaving a clear site for caribou to be hunted more by the wolf and they're getting extinct, put in blockades, which can be mounding, breaking down trees to block the sites of view. But all these do not give full ecological restoration, right? It may limit predation, but what you're forgetting is once that is open, in most of these areas, we have what we call peatlands. And peatlands are like the lungs of the earth, right? Peatlands actually sequester more carbon than forest, all the forests in the world.
Wait. For those of us who are Africans, what do you mean by peatlands?
The closest to peatlands will be the wetlands and mangrove we have in Ghana. So peatlands are a type of wetlands which have very, very slow decomposition rates.
Okay.
Right? So because of the acidity, because of the low oxygen, if you put a dead animal or plant in a peatland, it will take thousands of years to rot. Right?
Whoa.
So that restricted process of rotting or decomposition traps
the carbon,
right? And there are great stories that will tell you if you want to get away with murder, don't put the person in a peatland, because we found bodies in Europe where these bodies are intact and they date back from the oldest is the Tolund man. If you Google Tolund man, that's the oldest, couple of thousands old, and he's still intact. Right?
Really?
So we call these bog bodies. If you Google bog, B-O-G bodies, you see a lot of images showing you intact bodies from thousands and hundreds of years ago, which are preserved in peatlands all over Europe, right?
Okay.
And most of the oil and gas deposits are crossing these areas. So in the process of extracting, you either have to cut a road through a peatland, or make a clearing to set up your well pad, or make a seismic line for observation and extraction purposes, right? So this is where you draw the line. I mean, today, oil and gas prices are so bad, the value of oil from the tar sands is probably $7 a barrel. So today is not justified for new projects.
But is it even economical?
That's
Is it
what I'm
even
saying.
economical?
Today the numbers are not. But don't forget, in terms of volume, it's actually the biggest onshore deposit in the world. So
You mean tar sands?
yep. So back in the days when the value was sitting at $50 a barrel and higher, that's when it was very viable. No. Right? But looking at these numbers right now, you wouldn't justify new projects. But then if it's volume based, then yes, you can still say that it's worth it for the economies that depend on it.
Okay. So the existing oil refineries, tar sand production facilities,
Right.
do they have to still continue producing at an economic rate? Is that their plan?
In the last 3 years, a lot of companies have folded, and one of the big issues has to do with restoring the areas to pre-production setup. Because when these companies go bankrupt, they don't have funding to undo the well pad installations. So you actually have a lot of installations being abandoned.
Yeah.
I've seen sites where you can say about $15 to $30 million was invested in accommodation, setup, and within 6 months, it's empty because the numbers don't add up, right? And all these structures are sitting because there's been a steady decline. And with what is happening in the last 6 months, where Saudi had
The taps
pushed production up, and if that pushed sweet crude to about $30-40 a barrel, right? And I mean, for the first time in the last couple of weeks, you saw the US oil market hitting negative, right?
Yeah.
So all these do not make the tar sands economically viable. But as I said, the volume you have is still a reason to push people to understand that, hey, this is our resource. And so we might as well get something out of it before the whole world faces away from oil and gas, because it's coming.
Yeah.
Right? It's coming. And green energy never had as much of a push pre the virus, right? But clearly, everyone can agree that due to a reduction in commute and factory processing, air quality is getting better.
Yeah.
There's massive change. And another issue you would look at, most of the areas where cases are very high with the virus, aside the fact that you have the aged people, they have poor air quality. And also the air quality affects the functioning of the lungs, right? So, I mean, that could be, there are two factors. I know we have a lot of multiple ideas coming up, but that could be one of the reasons why Africa may not be so hard hit. Where Africa is still one of the areas not on high scale industrial production, as well as a couple of intact forests, or I would say annual trees, a ton of it, right? So although things are so bad, people still have intact lungs, which keep them going.
Okay.
Right? But if you look at most of the cases where, look at England, look at China, look at even states in the US where they're really hit, the air quality in New York is terrible. Right? Again, California has bad air quality, but we don't have very high cases. But if you map out all the areas with very high infection rates, one thing you're seeing is the aged and then air quality. Those are usually two dominant factors. So it's really justifying the shift and the current. I know Saudi is going to do something about the oil prices as at this week.
I think that the situation we are seeing now is peculiar because there's demand destruction due to the COVID-19 induced lockdown. And of course, there are unwise decisions simultaneously to open the taps.
No, that was a dispute, right, between Saudi and Russia and other OPEC members. And for Saudi, it's let's get our oil out there. Based on the volume we have, we can still be profitable even at $30 a barrel, and we kick everybody else out.
That's the cheapest production costs.
Right. So if the world would soon cancel oil and gas demand, let's get all our oil out there, right? So it's working for them. It's working for them and shutting everybody out. But then the low prices, which are now shutting down things like shale production, and the government here is injecting a lot of money to
subsidize the oil,
to try and sustain the industry. Unfortunately, we still have massive pipeline projects coming. I mean, if you're following the news,
the SL, whatever.
Yes, the last couple of months, the government bought a pipeline for $4.5 billion to be able to keep the projects running. And they're still pushing pipelines in between Canada and US to come up so that they can push as much, crude from the tar sands region before things shut down around the world.